this is John Scott. Welcome to the Enscope podcast. I will be your host again today. I am pleased to have with me Mr. Chris Ward, VP of Service Delivery over at DEft. He and I have known each other for several years now, and he is one of those services leaders that I constantly think about, someone that's been there, that's done it, and I think we could learn a lot from. So, Chris, thank you for joining us on the Enscope podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Happy to be here.
Well, and again, not everyone can see it. If they're listening to the podcast, they can't see where you are, but I'm super jealous of where you are. Right? It looks like you're in a little beach cottage, and maybe we'll get to see it later on today. But again, thanks for joining remotely. And I really just want to pick your brain on something that I think is a trend in the industry, right? And again, you've been there, you've seen all these flavors of services. And I kind of want to pick your brain, what is the future? Where are we going? Again, DEft, y'all are doing something unique. You've worked for some other large organizations where you're offering some very unique services.
Sure.
So again, you and I talked about the other day, like the word service is really starting to evolve, right? And I think there's almost a new definition for the word service.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, John. I think most of us in this business that have been around for a long time, we tend to think of services as professional services or maybe managed services, something that a human is involved in delivery, right. And there's some type of an hourly rate, right, or a billing ratio that's there. But in today's world, that definition it's not so much changing maybe as much as it's broadening. Now in the VAR industry for a long time, it's been the case that if you talk to a Cisco or an HPE, their definition of services was selling care packs and smart nets, right? Which I think I never really considered that services, but it was part of it. But in today's world, and in the 2020 and beyond, it's really everything is a service model. So you look again at some of the OEMs, I point back to like Dell and HPE, things like Apex and GreenLake, and it's really putting everything into this consumption model. But that now anything that's repeatable or recurring revenue is kind of being classified now as a service. So as services leaders, you have to take that into account when you're speaking with customers and working with your sales teams, because it's a different world today than what it has been even 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an evolution, right? And I don't know if it's, I don't think it's a destination. I think it's a journey, right? I like to say that a bit, but like why are we making this transition? Why are we going from kind of the traditional fixed fee, project based, managed services based to these package type offerings, which include things like product, material, service, support services? Like why are we moving there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's really, from a financial impact standpoint, you look at, corporate valuations, whether you're a public company or not, everyone's looking for that recurring revenue. So how can we make that happen? And in the traditional professional services world, that's difficult, right? You have a statement of work, and there's a start and there's an end, and then you're done, and you kind of move on to the next thing. But how do we turn this into more of a perpetual motion machine, right? Where we continually deliver value services for a customer. And in the past, that really meant more of that MSP model where you were delivering kind of day two operational support for customers. And that's still super relevant today, whether it's on premise or in the cloud. But I think when we look at professional services, I think there's a new model today where you can in fact have this kind of recurring structure with a customer that is very consultative in nature. So you're not just worried about day-to-day alerts or alarm bells going off and break fix type stuff. It's that ongoing kind of hand-holding or conversations with the customers and kind of guiding them to, okay, what's next, right? What's new in your business, and how can we help you continue to be successful? And I kind of likened it to a TAMS type of a role, right? This technical account manager sort of a role that, some of the software OEMs have had that for a long time, but, in our industry, in the VAR industry, that's a little bit of a newer concept, but I firmly believe it's something that, number one, you can bill for, which is great. But number two, it really provides a lot of value to the customer because it gives them that kind of a crystal ball view into the future. And it's not just one person that's a TAM; it could be an entire team of people, right? Depending on what the customer's objectives are, you can bring in the right folks to formulate what the technical solution can be to solve their biggest business challenges.
Yeah, and we've seen that in roles like a VCIO or, like you mentioned, a technical account manager. But and again, we've talked about this with some other guests on the podcast, but it really is an outcome focus, right? At the end of the day, that they don't.
Sure.
Yes, the break fix, all that's really good. That's really helpful. But to your point, like the guidance piece of, hey, I understand your business. Here are the things you need to consider moving forward into the future, right? And again, like, for smaller organizations and larger organizations, I think this transition piece is. Do you think it's largely driven by the financial aspect of it, just making it easier to consume?
It's really interesting, right? Because I think from the OEMs and the folks that the manufacturers, whether they be traditional metal manufacturers or cloud-based folks, they're looking for that recurring revenue. But the conversation that we have to have with our customers is a little bit different. And I'm sure a lot of you have been. I've been caught in the trap before of speaking with a customer and talking about all the greatness and benefit of going into a consumption or a recurring model. But then you find out at the CFO level that no, right? That's not the way that that business runs, and they really like to have that capital expenditure model and depreciation and so on. You really have to understand what your customer's stance is from a financial standpoint before you get into those discussions. But I think more and more, a lot of businesses, a lot of customers are leaning more into that role because while in the long term, it's always going to be a little more expensive, right, to consume something on an as a service model, but you're always up to date. From when you look at some of these, again, like a Green Lake, Apex, whatever it is, desktop as a service, et cetera. The greatness about these models is you never have that depreciated asset that, I'll get to that at some point in the future. And before you know it, you got a 10-year-old sand sitting in the corner that is struggling, right? These things they're constantly refreshed. You know what's going to happen. You can plan for it. You can budget for it. It's just an easier model to be in, but it takes a little bit of time to, train the customer in some cases to think in those ways.
And training the team, right? So those responsible for selling these services, it's a completely different conversation to your point around selling fixed fee professional services, around selling managed services, around selling staff aug. Like those are kind of the traditional, those things happen. But when you start talking about consumption, like what are the levers for driving consumption up or down, right? What's included in that per monthly, that monthly price? And it's amazing what we can do today. Like I was trying to run like a Power BI desktop template, and I'm a Mac user, and I was able to go out to Paperspace and stand up a virtual CPU that I get billed per hour that it's turned on, and it took me 15 minutes to provision all this, load everything I need to, and like it was already licensed. I mean, it's amazing the kind of technology that's out there today that enables this kind of consumption-based model, really.
Absolutely. And again, from that traditional services outlook on the professional services approach, it really does give you an opportunity to bake in a set of services, more traditional service delivery, along with this new definition of everything as a service. So you can still get that revenue coming in, and it can actually help increase traditional metrics like utilization and so forth. When you have known work that you can forecast, maybe 3, 6, 9 months in advance. It's certainly much easier than riding the sine wave that we've all been used to of utilization in the past. So it can really help level that out.
What are some of the things that you have seen in your career as we've made this progression or transition to this as a service model? Like what are some of the leadership challenges, would you say, in evolving to that, right? It's hard to go from a traditional services like project-based, consultative-based organization to an as a service. Do people typically make that transition, or are you doing a little bit of everything? I mean, how have you seen that?
It's always a tough transition to make. I think if the team that you have both on the pre-sale side, most certainly. Like we talked about earlier, it's a completely different conversation. So, understanding that, this isn't a purely technical conversation. You have to interlace the business aspects and nowadays certainly the financial aspects of that discussion in there as well. So you have to have that kind of a FinOps, if you will, a mindset going into some of these discussions, and know that at some point, especially if it's a large engagement or a large deal, you're probably going to be talking to a CFO versus a CIO at some point in that journey, and know how to have those discussions. But also, and maybe even most importantly, on the delivery teams that are actually delivering the service, the traditional model has been, these folks tend to be very technically oriented. They come in, they stand up whatever it is they're going to stand up. They do their testing, they do their QA, they do a handoff to the customer, and they're out. And it's this it's a very technical approach to things. But in the world of today with as a service and customer success, training the delivery teams to understand that while you may be, spinning up X environment for this customer, making sure that they understand what it is that environment is doing for the customer in the end, right? How is that technical solution helping the customer to, expand and grow their business or solve whatever technical or business challenge they have, and make sure that they have eyes on that, so that as they're going through the delivery of it, and then also at the end having a checkpoint when you're doing the handoff to the customer. Not only technically does the solution work as it's designed, but is it actually going to solve the business problem, right? That it was put in to solve. And getting engineers to think like that is not the easiest thing to do. So kind of baking that in early on in train, especially if you have the capability to bring in younger talent and grow that. Kind of building that mindset, right, and ingraining that early on in the process is going to be key for the future, I believe.
I mean, that's a huge point, though, right? The delivery aspect of as a service it's different, but it's not all that different to a certain extent, right? Like there are aspects of, okay, if we're going to deliver as a service, either the infrastructure, the technology is already set up, and you're just partitioning off pieces for specific customers, or you're taking a traditional, I think of like hosted UC as an example, take an on-premises application, call manager. There's a project-based work to get that to a cloud, a managed environment, right? And then you build that, and then you start charging this recurring model. And so, again, there are, what we see from a lot of our clients is, flexibility around how you bill and price all these projects is really key. And like that kind of flexibility is what a lot of large organizations, more advanced organizations, quite honestly, are looking for. Is I want to be able to do as a service. I want to be able to do fixed fee, managed. I want to include a third party. Like there are a lot of components that go into the all this stuff. So
absolutely, it's very complex.
Yeah. When we start talking about selling as a service. And really that transition from, hey, we sold a deal to delivery. You mentioned a couple of items, but like what is helpful in transitioning from one opportunity to a delivery organization in kind of this new world of as a service?
Sure. Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit. And in my mind, it really goes back to making sure that the delivery team and the delivery organization understands the ultimate business challenge that they're trying to solve. I think, again, in the past, it's been a lot of, okay, here's the statement of work, here's the bomb, go build it. But okay, well, so we'll build the ship, but what's it? Is it a warship? Is it is it a luxury yacht? Is it ocean going? Is it for a lake? Right? What's this thing going to do when it's actually done being built?
Why is that important though for the delivery organization? Why is it important for them to know that?
I think it's hugely important because not everything can be built in a customized way, and so as much as we like to standardize and as much as we like to have processes put in place, even back in the days of a VBlock type of infrastructure, right? Yeah. It was very rigid and defined to a point, but there were pieces in there that needed to be able to be customized. And like any solution that you put in, you have to know, why am I customizing this, or how should I customize it? Which levers and knobs should I pull and turn? And in the past, that's really been more so, again, very technically focused. I need to tune this because it's going to run a database with X amount of IOPS, and I need X amount of IOs, so I need to turn these knobs and dials to make that happen. But in today's world, it's more of, I'm building this solution. I built this 10 times in the past, but in this case, it's for a healthcare environment versus a retail environment. So I need to be aware of maybe HIPAA compliance standards versus maybe PCI compliance standards, or I need to be aware of this is going to be a very, especially in the cloud, maybe this is going to be a very elastic environment. It's going to need to scale up and scale down on a regular basis, and kind of a retail model perhaps versus maybe a healthcare model where it's much more static. And so you need to understand what those business cases are, those use cases for what you're building, and kind of make some of those architectural decisions based upon not just purely technical specifications, but business level specifications, I guess is the best way I could put it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think this is the destination of, where services are today, the as a service model, or do you see something in the future that we're not quite there yet, we're not equipped yet? Kind of if you had a glass ball, where do you see everything going?
Honestly, I think we're in the infantile stages of this whole as a service model. So I think we've got another several years to go before that really begins to mature. And then beyond that, it's pretty tough to look at anything past 2 or 3 years is always tough in this industry.
Oh yeah.
But I think there's a lot of maturity to be gained, and from my past experience, I can say something like desktop as a service, right? The challenge that we have today is when you go in and you start to have that discussion with the customer, they love the overall big picture, but they kind of have this gravitational pull to them to go back and they want to end up deconstructing. When you tell them it's going to be $150 per user per month, hypothetically for this device service, everything all in, they inherently want to go back and pick that apart and kind of deconstruct the pricing. Well, how much am I really paying for X, Y, and Z? And so, having that discussion and getting the customer on board with, hey, what I'm selling you is it's this package singular thing, and you don't need to be worried about necessarily what's under the covers. Just know that if you feel that you're getting the value out of it for that $150 a user, that's all that really matters, right? It doesn't matter what the cost is underneath. And it's pretty easy for the customer to know if you're trying to gouge them on margin and whatnot. You're not the only person out there quoting this service, right? So you got to be competitive. But I think getting the customer over that hump and thinking in that way is the biggest challenge we have to overcome before everything really takes off, in my opinion.
I mean, I kind of foresee this, and again, the service I mentioned earlier is, a single person standing up pretty much a virtual machine, right? But when I'm building it, like I could tell you how much RAM I wanted, right? And I was priced per 2 gig, 4 gig, 8, very granular levels of what are my options here. However, when I think about, rolling that out for a larger organization, I mean, that's where, organizations like yours, DEft, is. That's where you need that expertise to come in and say, okay, well, have you thought about how you're going to print, right, from these virtual machines? Right. Have you thought about, internet access and security and just all these things? So, I think there's always going to be this world of, well, let me step back. I think people fear the as a service to a certain extent because it reduces the value that some of these services organizations provide. I really don't think that's the case. I think you have to have this expertise. Yeah, exactly. I think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity to grow, right? Because again, in that traditional professional services model, there's a beginning, there's an end. You're in, you're out. But in this new world, it's very just like the traditional MSP model, right? It's sticky, and with stickiness comes longevity, and with stickiness comes additional business. And ultimately, really, less competition to a certain extent, because once the customer feels confident and comfortable with the services that you're providing, you essentially become their de facto standard, right? And I know it's the age-old term, that trusted advisor, but yeah,
I love that term.
That's where you want to be, right? You want to perform, have a stellar level of customer service, and make the customers happy so they keep coming back for more.
Do you feel like these services organizations, again, such as yours or others out there, do you think they're leading the OEMs towards change, or do you think it's the other way around? The OEMs are saying, hey, we're now able to license or do subscriptions or consumption based, and then services organizations wrap their value add services around it. Like, is there a balance? Is one leading versus the other? Like, what are you seeing out there?
I think the charge was initially led by the OEMs in getting to this model, but I think that the service providers and the resellers out there are helping to better shape it. And there's been a lot of I was very, very, very early on in HPE's GreenLake platform, and that thing went through version. We were on like version 3, if you will, of that model from HPE before we even had a single customer that actually bought into it, right? So these things take a little bit of time, and there's a lot of feedback, and that's why they have these advisory boards and councils for the partners to go back and give that feedback. But most importantly, they provide a massive opportunity for folks like us to wrap additional services and additional value add around it, because they can't provide all of the services and all of the support that are required for that environment over time. Right. And in most cases, nor do they really want to. So there's a big opportunity there, I think, for the partner community to really grab hold of this and kind of frame it in a way that would get the OEMs what they want and need, which is ultimately that recurring revenue, but also allow the partners to take big advantage of that and increase margins, increase revenue as well.
I mean, it's really interesting to me to think about where this could all go. Like how I'm not smart enough to know or predict this, right? And it's hard. Know what kind of technology is going to come out that changes the game, quite honestly. And it's sure. It's been amazing. Like I remember like some of those converged solutions like the vBlock and, FlexPod. Like I thought that was awesome stuff, right? The idea that you could, and there's all sorts of tools around sizing those things and building them. And so like that was a while ago, right? And so I'm really excited about how technology enables, the future of what services really means.
It's interesting, right? Nothing ever really gets replaced per se. So, there are, big companies out there still have mainframes. Not a lot of them, but there are some. And I remember, I just saw a post on LinkedIn today. One of my former colleagues, who's been at Nutanix for a number of years, just departed and is going after another opportunity. But it made me think back to, like 2010, I think it was, or somewhere in that time frame, when Nutanix first came out, and at that time I was a leader of a pre-sales technical team. Yeah, it was like, I'm like, man, like in 10 years, SANs are toast, right? This is like this is where it's going to be. But we stand here today, and these Nutanix and vSAN and all these other technologies, right? They've come a long way, and they do great things, but there's still a need out there, right, for more traditional kind of block SAN type of storage, and that's going to remain the case. And that just adds to, there's always more and more levels of complexity that get added, right? But with that is a huge opportunity, because it's not as simple as it used to be, and customers need guidance in that journey. And that's what we're here to provide at the end of the day.
100%. Okay, well, so here's a part of the show where I ask you for all your wisdom, boiled down to one or two things. But like, what is one thing that you would suggest, recommend for some of these services organization if they have not quite made the transition to as a service or that evolution? Sure. Where can they start making some impacts to their business?
Yeah, I think in the words of AWS, right, figure out what your superpower is today, and then take that and mold that into either delivery or MSP, kind of that as a service approach and model, and make sure that you're baking traditional services, if you will, into any other products that you're reselling that are in that model to enhance and expand them. And then I really think there's a huge opportunity there, again, in that kind of the advisory services model, right, where in the past, I guess the term that I've used recently is the legacy approach for our business has typically been design the solution for the customer for free, essentially, as pre-sales. Then you sell it, right? And then you go implement it. But changing that mindset and taking more of a sell it first, then design it, and then implement it. So you're actually getting paid for that design work and some of that advisory work. It's a little bit of a different approach, but it's number one, it's much more profitable. you waste a lot less time because you know that the customer is fully bought in before you spend those cycles and make all those Visio diagrams, et cetera. Right. And finally, right, as I've mentioned several times, make sure you understand what your customer is ultimately trying to achieve on the business side of things. Not, the propeller still needs to spin technically, but you got to power up that other propeller on the business side and start thinking more in those terms to be successful in this new world.
I mean, that essentially sounds like a word for like diversification. Don't stop doing PS. Don't stop doing manage. Like, this is a new avenue. It's a new go to market.
Additional,
but
incremental.
That doesn't mean you stop doing the things that got you to where you are today, right? So
absolutely. Well,
that's awesome. Well, Chris, again, man, I like to keep these things short and sweet. Where can people find more about DEft, more about Chris Ward, what you're doing over there, and potentially reach out if they're interested in talking to you?
Yeah, check out www.deft.com. We're quick little ad here is we're a co-location managed hosting provider, but we also do a lot in the cloud world, specifically with AWS. And we really want to be in that hybrid advisor, right, hybrid provider space. And we've got a lot of great capabilities there. So you can check us out there. Me personally, I'm always up on LinkedIn, so feel free to hit me up, and I'd be happy to have any further discussions that make sense.
Awesome, man. Well, I think you hit on a couple of things that we could have probably even other shows around, charging for pre-sales being one of them, right? Sure. I think that has definitely been a theme that we've seen lately. But again, thank you for joining us from your beachfront cottage and imparting some wisdom on us. And again, I've always thought very highly of you, your background, experience, and all the things you're doing up there. So thank you for giving us some of your time.
No, you bet. I appreciate it as well. Thanks, John.
All right, Chris. Thanks, man. Bye.
You bet.
For those of you that are interested in learning more about the Enscope podcast, you can check us out at scopestack.io/podcast. You can see all the episodes that are out there and subscribe on your latest, Spotify, Apple, all over the place. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you soon.